Welcome back to a Celtic State of Mind. It's Friday afternoon. I'm Paul John Dykes, and today I bring back together Colin Watt and Alan Morrison on the show for the first time, probably in well over a year, I would say, guys.
Yeah, probably longer than that, but it's good to see. And just before we came on air, just give you a bit of behind the scenes. We're just discussing Alan's Sabutio collection. That is mightily impressive, Alan. I think if I was to do that, I'd probably end up in divorce. But yeah, you've done really well there.
Yes. Well, there's a story. No, I'm only joking.
I've got to ask the question, Alan, are you in the basement or in the loft? Because I can imagine you've been thrown out of the main building to obviously ensure that they are set up chronologically, alphabetically, whatever it might be.
Well, it's actually the sort of, I suppose, the nearest I've got to a box room. Number 3 is just about to go to university, so I'm trying to reclaim this room, but of course they keep coming back. So I've never actually properly got into the room. I've managed to get that display up, but there's a lot more to do before this properly becomes the sort of the man cave, the Sabutio cave, and the podcasting cave, and the writing cave. But it's on. We've made a statement with the wall display, but we're not there yet.
You get to an age, Alan, where I think you just embrace geekery. Back in the day, being a geek was something that nobody wanted to be, but now it's just embrace it. And obviously, we were talking about the geekery of this jersey yesterday, and Chris caused something of a furore by doing some different colourways, and that got the chat going on the socials as well. Lots to discuss here. I've thrown together my central defensive partnership of Colin Watt and Alan Morrison, but I do want to talk about the central defensive partnership, Alan. I want to kick off with this one, because I remember some fascinating discussions we've had over the years about the best centre-halves that we've had, and obviously the way that you were able to establish that, through the data collection that you have kind of gathered over the years. I was always astonished that guys like Benkovic were really high performers, but obviously never played many games. We always had that chat about Jack Hendry, etc. But now we're in a scenario where it's really CCV plus any of the remaining 3. We've got Austin Trusty, Liam Scales, and Mike Nawrocki, let's not forget. Although I believe he's not playing, Alan, because it would upset the balance, him being a natural right footer. I might be wrong. Talk us through this, because I don't know if you've got enough data on the 4 guys under review, if you like.
Yeah, just this wasn't planned, actually. This is genuinely just the way it's fallen today. As Paul reached out to me about today's show and mentioned talking about centre backs, I was in the middle of writing a piece which is now up on huddlebreakdown.com, which is looking at this very topic really, and more around the directly about who should be the sort of starter going forward, with Scales coming in and Kilmarnock and having a solid game versus Trusty, who I'm not sure if Trusty missed out because his partner was having a baby, or there were other reasons why he missed out. I don't know. I guess we'll maybe find out at the weekend there. So really looking at that topic, and as you say, Paul, I do have a framework for looking at centre backs. There are a couple of aggregated defensive metrics. That sounds like it's like a few hundred people just switched off at that second there. But just bear with me. They're quite. I would argue they're quite good in terms of they do meet the eye test. They're a bit of a mouthful. So defensive action success rate looks at, forget passing, right? And this passing doesn't come into this. I'll cover passing separately. Just looks at all your defensive actions, your challenges, your duels, your aerials, your interceptions, fouls, all that sort of thing, and really looks at two components of it. One is, were you successful? As in, did you intercept the ball? So you stopped a through ball, for example. I would fall into the defensive action success rate as a success. Mm-hmm. But if it's, let's say you intercepted a ball, it went out for a throw in, you haven't actually won possession back for your team, but you've successfully intercepted the ball, right? So that counts as a win on that one. The second element is again a bit of a mouthful. Apologies. So it's possessions won from defensive action. So this is not only have you kind of gone up, maybe won a aerial duel, but then the ball goes to a Celtic player, so you've actually won possession as a result of that. So it's two different slightly lenses to look at defensive actions. And if you put those two together, you get a really strong view of defensive strength in general. And as I say, if you map those 2 data points, you get the likes of Carter Vickers, Julienne, Van Dijk at the top of the chart, and you get the likes of Jack Hendry, sadly, and Efe Ambrose and Stephen Welsh, sadly, at the kind of the bottom other corner. Now, just to give you some idea, this is elite sport we're talking about. So if you map the average Celtic centre back in the last sort of 7-8 years, Carter Vickers is probably performing at about 5% above that. That's how fine the margins are in terms of these sort of metrics. But if you were to map, if you're to map purely defensive metrics, not looking at any other aspect of the game, aggregated together, then you'd put Carter Vickers and Trusty together off the current centre backs. Scales would be kind of around average. Nawrocki would be slightly below average. Welsh would be well below average in terms of players still at the club. But then, other thing that I did in today's analysis is really looking at two components. So that's all about defensive action. The second bit that is clearly vitally important at Celtic is ball progression, right? So again, the numbers are going to be skewed here by how managers wanted to play. So, for example, Neil Lennon centre backs. It wasn't the priority for Neil Lennon to have centre backs that played the ball out from the back. He played two players in midfield, Brown and Bitton often or similar, and he wanted them to be the ball progressors, not the centre backs. So, the current crop of centre backs have got far greater ball progression numbers because of style of play, is what I'm saying, more than necessarily they were better ball progressors. Yeah, that makes sense. But if you look at ball progression, then two key metrics. One is pack passing. So that's the ability to pass the ball through lines, take players out of the game. And again, sorry, just to put it into context around why is this important at Celtic? Celtic centre backs average between the pair of them average over 200 passes per game. To put that into context, the opposition in Scotland average 152 passes per game. The whole team, 152 passes. Celtic two centre backs are passing the ball significantly higher than the whole of the opposition. So that's why it's really vital to Brendan Rodgers, ball possession, control, game model, if I can put it that way. And not surprisingly, the current set of centre backs have got the best passing scores of any centre backs going back, 7 or 8 years. But again, that's not to say they were the best passers. It's just how the style of play that they've been asked to play. But off those centre backs, in terms of if you just looked at our population now, Scales is by some distance the most progressive ball passer of all of them, by about 10. If you were to give a point for passing, he's about 10 points a game. Averages 75 points. Nawrocki would actually be second, 65. Trusty third, 63, and Carter Vickers 55. So Scales is by some distance the best ball progressor. And then if you look at the other component of that, which is carrying the ball forward at feet, this happens a lot less in games. So whereas your average Celtic centre back, might be making, let's say, somewhere between 9 and 12 pack passes a game, you're only really making between sort of 3 and 5 ball carries. So this is where you're carrying the ball forward with the ball at your feet in the opposition half. Yeah, going at least 10 yards with the ball. Now, not surprisingly, you can guess who the best centre back Celtic have had. In this regard, it was Christopher Ajer. He completed nearly 6 of these a game. The average is about 3. And again, Scales is probably the best of the current crop at 3.74 per game. Now, that's obviously a much lower volume. So you're not, pack passing is a lot more prevalent than ball carry. But as we saw it against Kilmarnock at the weekend, where Celtic are increasingly faced with man-to-man orientation in midfield, man marking, and a sort of medium block as well. And Celtic have struggled to break that down in many games, Bruges being the best example of it. Bruges absolutely tied Celtic in knots with this orientation, but other clubs have did it. The Rangers did it at Ibrox very successfully. Celtic have really struggled against this. Carrying the ball forward from the back is one good way to disrupt it. So it's not a thing to be kind of discounted. So, long story short, then, if you're to take in the round defensive capabilities, ball progression, two key aspects of centre back play, and you were to say who should we play, Trusty or Scales, the answer would be it depends. It depends what you want. It depends what the priority is in that game. Simplistically, and again, if you were sort of modelling this, you would argue that you'd play Scales against most Scottish opposition because you're less concerned about defending. you're more concerned about getting the ball forward, breaking down low blocks, and so forth. If you're playing against teams that have got fast, strong, athletic forwards, which is every team in Europe, and probably the Derby as well, you probably play trusty. But so where I come back to, what is it that you value? What is it that you are willing to trade off? Are you willing to trade off defensive solidity for ball progression, or vice versa? What's important to you? I would argue that at centre back, you don't want to be switching your centre backs every other game. You need to build partnerships. You need to build solidity. You need to build understanding, and that in itself has a value which, I haven't got off the top of my head. I can't measure, but there's probably a way to do it. And therefore, I'd probably be picking Trusty because he's the most defensively solid, and I'd give up a little bit of ball progression capability to do that. Now, the caveat being, Scales is incredibly useful to have on the bench, because if we're getting bogged down, which happened in the League Cup final, you make that switch and you say, right, I'm going to prioritize ball progression over defensive solidity, recovery, pace, all that, and I'll put Scales on, and that's a great option to have. So that's the way I would look at it, but I'm sure others would violently disagree.
It makes perfect sense, Colin. I mean, obviously, it would be tremendous, Alan, if you could find a player who was brilliant at both. But again, what the figure would be to bring them to the football club, who knows? But it makes perfect sense that if you're defending, then Trusty's a better option. And when you are going to have lots of the ball and you are attacking a team like Kilmarnock at the weekend or St Johnstone this weekend, maybe Scales is a better option. But I agree with you. You want to find that solid partnership. Now, there's lots of good comments coming through in relation to that. Some of them coming in before Alan's explanation, and we'll bring them in to the discussion. Colin, when I was talking about this, I had a much more simplistic view on it. I mean, what Alan says to me, I'm sitting here nodding because I totally agree. You can see Scales doing that Ayer thing and running with the ball. Trusty's best game arguably was against Atalanta.
Yep.
You might argue, and that's when we were under a caution, we're defending, and all these capabilities start coming into it. But I just felt in the last few weeks, I simplified it probably to understand it myself, that Brendan Rodgers had to bring in the tried and tested where he could trust some of the guys like Forrest and Taylor and Scales. But when you start stripping back the data, going for the rest of these games, St Johnstone at the weekend, basing this on what Alan just said, I'm going to keep Scales in the team alongside CCV. When we go to Ibrox, this is where the dilemma arises. You don't want to chop and change your team, but Trusty's probably the better option. So what do you do, Colin, in that respect?
I think there's a major caveat that has to be added alongside stats. And as impressive as Alan's stats are, what you've got to caveat it with is the style of play that Celtic are playing, as you say, in a game where you're coming up sort of backs against the wall like Atalanta. Both of them looked very good. And I'm sure if you looked at the stats for that game, Alan, both of them are very high in the percentile. However, the style of football Celtic's played recently has either been electric, like the first half against Kilmarnock, or extremely passive and extremely dull and boring, like the game away to St Johnstone. Now, in both scenarios there, as Alan was mentioning, the two centre-halves average around 200 passes. That's because we're not able to get out. That game against St Johnstone was the game that really kind of looked at it and you went, this is what it was like just before Brendan Rodgers left for Leicester. It was slow, it was passive, it was... You could almost read exactly what the Celtic player was going to do next, what their next pass was going to be. You could read it like a book. We didn't create enough, and I think the creativity is sucked out of Celtic's game when we go back to that style of football. And that's the one thing that really sort of frustrates me about Brendan Rodgers is he doesn't seem to have a plan B in the league. There's a plan B in Europe. We saw it this year. We obviously played a lot better away from home with the Dortmund game as a sort of anomaly. That was a big word for me. As compared to seasons it's been before. But sometimes when you're watching Celtic play in the league, there's just a sort of going through the phases motion with the team. And it doesn't matter for me who's playing centre-half in that sense because we're not really being attacked to that extent. St Johnstone scored their only chance really away at McDermott. Kilmarnock, I think they had 2 or 3 shots on goal. If you class their goal as a shot as well, that was more of a cross. If you look at the stats for that game,
Have you fired one of them in at the sevens, Colin? That's not a cross.
Well, hey, we'll talk about that later, Paul. But when you're coming up against teams like St Johnstone on Sunday, it's a one-off game and everything's completely different. It doesn't matter what happened at McDermott. It doesn't matter what happened at Kelly. For me, I think you've just got to go with what you have seen in your own eye and then make it align with the stats. So if we're saying there that Austin Trusty is the better striker to come up against a fast, quick, athletic striker, I watched him get torn apart at St Mirren Park. He was torn apart by Olasanya up front. So the stats are great on paper, but you've got to tie it in and align it with what you're seeing by eye. And for me, I think at this point of the season, it's more important to have, as Alan kind of rounded that off with, that partnership. And if it's Scales and Carter Vickers, that's what we just have to go with. I'm not saying I think Scales is the best player in there, but we have to get that over the line, and then after that we can rotate, we can do whatever we want. But just get the game won on Sunday, get the game won the following Saturday, and then we can look at it from there.
You know, just to pick up on one of your points, Colin, on the kind of bullying aspect of a big Stratton lad like Trusty. I go back to the comment that Brendan made on the sidelines when Simon Murray was bullying Trusty. Weak as the proverbial, I think, was the comment that was made. And remember, Alan, back to Chris Julian. Chris Julian was accused of being bullied by certain centre forwards. Lyndon Dykes being one of them. But there was a few occasions in Europe as well. I'm guessing, obviously, that comes up. That does work into the stats insofar as they're losing aerial duels, for example, and things like that. Is that a concern for you with Trusty? Has that been a concern for you this season?
Well, so, listen, you can always come up with exceptions, right? What I'm looking at here is, if you look at, where are we with Trusty? Equivalent to 32 matches, right? So I could cherry pick one game and say, oh, look at that game under those conditions against that centre forward in that weather on that pitch, and say, oh, wasn't he awful? We can all do that. But this is why you try and use as big a sample as you possibly can to form an overall profile of a player, and that's what this data is. There is no doubt that Lyndon Dykes gave Chris Julian a bad time in a game at Livingston once. Absolutely. Does that invalidate all the other games that he was aerially dominant? No, it doesn't. It adds to the mix. And that's why he's not 100% on everything, because you don't win all your aerial duels. And same principle with Trusty. So that you got to bear that in mind. You've also got to bear in mind that Celtic choose to play a very predictable style of football. By predictable, I mean, other than in Europe, as Colin said, they don't change the style of play dependent on the opposition.
Mm-hmm.
Very minor tweaks at most. And Postecoglou was the same, and Rodgers has been the same. And no, that to me is not a smart way to play football, because I think you should always take account of the opposition's strengths and weaknesses. But Celtic's advantage financially and quality on the pitch is so overwhelming that they're probably one of the few teams in European football that can literally set up the same in every game and probably just about get away with it. So in that sense, they're quite predictable. And then it becomes a little bit like a microcosm being Nicholas Kuhn. Nicholas Kuhn has only got two things he's ever going to do. He's either going to blast past you on the outside or he's going to cut in on his left foot. Right? Very predictable. But the question becomes, can you stop him? And it's the same with Celtic. They're very predictable, but can you stop them? And as we see from the league table, we see the number of points gap at the top, see the number of goals that Celtic scored. Most teams can't eventually stop them. They'll get ground down, they'll make a mistake, etc. The corollary to that is that other teams know how to set up against Celtic, or they've got different versions of it. And I alluded to this this combination of a mid-block and man-to-man orientation, marking in midfield. That is the thing that disrupts Celtic the most, mainly because the three players that Celtic have got in midfield are not very press resistant. Neither, Hatate is brilliant when he's got loads of time and space. He's not so good when he's under pressure. McGregor doesn't have the legs necessarily to run away from people anymore. Engels is getting better, but he's back to goal. He's not brilliant. He loses the ball, gets nudged off the ball quite easily. So Celtic's midfield is not very press resistant. So it's a smart way to play. So teams are going to do that. Teams are more tactically sophisticated now than they probably ever have been because of, video analysis and all that, and data and analytics, etc. So they know how to. These teams aren't going to just roll over and let Celtic win. So they're going to do things that disrupt Celtic's play. Therefore, they let the centre halves have the ball because, as much as they're functional passers of the ball, they're not like Franz Beckenbauer. They're not Ruud Gullit. They're not going to ping a 50-yard pass onto somebody's foot from at the edge of the box. You man mark the midfield, you man mark the forwards and the wingers, and you let the centre halves have the ball. Then it's then beholden to the rest of the team to get into positions where they can receive the ball.
And that,
That's where we have problems. So you can blame the centre halves for getting bogged down, but it's more complicated than that. It's often the players and the movement of the team to break the man-to-man press. So, Scales is a functional defender. Trusty's a functional ball progressor. It's a trade-off, as I say. Just because I'm saying one is better than the other at these two attributes doesn't mean to say that the other is rubbish at this. It's all matters of degree, and that's what it comes down to. As I say, it comes down to a trade-off. It's what you're willing to have a little bit less of and a little bit more of, depending on the position. The main problem remains the same as it has done since we had Chris Ayer and Chris Julian, is that we don't have two centre halves of equivalent quality, and that has been the case, for 6 or 7 years now. Carter Vickers is such a high benchmark, especially in his defending, not so much in his ball progression, but he's more than functional, but especially in his defending. No one in these intervening years has come up to his level quite, and that's the big issue. Not and I don't think Trusty or Scales is off that standard either. So I think we're still stuck in this. We don't have two centre backs that are equivalently competent.
Yeah, I think with that, Paul, what people would say is if they're just watching it with the eye and not looking at the stats, is most Celtic fans would probably tell you there's not a lot between Trusty and Scales right now, and one seems to become better when they're not playing. For weeks they were crying out for Scales, and then Scales comes in, makes a mistake, and they go, "Oh, bring Trusty back in." And I think between them there isn't a lot. There isn't a lot at all. The one thing that bogs Trusty down is that transfer fee. The fact that Celtic paid £6 million for him, which isn't a lot in today's modern football, but in terms of Scottish football, it's a big fee, and you're expecting a £6 million player. And the fact that there isn't much between the two, as Alan says, stats say there's nothing between them. If you look at the eye, there's nothing between them. What you're needing is for Trusty to develop further, and you're hoping that for that price fee, that what we've paid for him, the ability's there. It's just not came out yet.
Colin's going to take us through some guys that are out of contract at the end of the season, Alan. But when we're looking at the future, and we're moving on next season, always trying to progress. Two names that have been mentioned briefly today are Stephen Welsh, already out on loan, and Mike Nawrocki, who came in from the cold, and I think performed pretty well in the two games that he played in. But I can understand why he's not getting a game at the moment, because it's all about balance. I think that's what Brendan Rodgers has said. These two guys, in your view, having looked at the data, Alan, do they have a future at Celtic? Stephen Welsh, Mike Nawrocki?
Unfortunately, across all of the kind of data points that I mentioned there, Welsh does not profile well. I don't think he's a player that's suited to the type of physicality you get in the Scottish League, which is probably quite an extreme. I think he would flourish in a less physical league. He's probably one of these players that would do well in Italy, I would think. A more tactical, technical league where he's got a bit more time on the ball. He's not getting battered around by big strikers all the time. He's a good passer of the ball, actually, Welsh, when not under pressure. So I think he's a good footballer, but I just don't think he's in the right league. So I would be surprised if there's a future for him. Nawrocki is an interesting one. I mean, bear in mind that we've only got just over 10 games worth of minutes to look at, so it's a low sample. He actually profiles quite well, but the thing with Nawrocki is fundamentally he's got a lack of pace, and you can't coach that. He's not going to improve that. That's not going to get better. We are the team that plays one of the highest lines, not just in Scotland, but in Champions League. So at Champions League level, Celtic one of the highest defensive lines in the competition. And if you've got a defender that's very slow, and you're coming up against attackers that are probably better than yours, that's a real risk. That's a real issue. So that I don't see how you can square that. I just think it's a bad piece of recruitment. I think he's a perfectly functional defender. He would suit a team that plays much deeper, where he's being asked to defend probably nearer his own box. But as a high line, front-footed defender that's going to have to do a lot of recovering and running back, I just don't see it.
You know, one of the criticisms that has come through in the comments is around his passing as well, Alan. How is he actually showing up when it comes to the data, when it comes to his passing?
So I might be guilty of fueling that fire in the past, but actually, to be fair to him, and I'll change my opinion when the data changes, his passing numbers are actually pretty good. His ball progression, even running out from the back, he actually averages more ball carries, sorry, than Scales. Again, very small sample, and you'd have to look at the games he's played in. So, for example, I was doing a comparison between Schlupp and Taylor the other day. And about 70% of Schlupp's games have been against teams that you'd consider to be the harder teams that Celtic play, and I don't suspect that would be the case with Taylor so much. You have to, and the standard of the opposition is the thing which has the most impact on Celtic player stats. It's the one factor. Is it because the Scottish League is the most polar league in the whole of Europe. It's the most predictable league in Europe. So the disparity in gap in quality that Celtic play at home is greater than you'll see in any other league in Europe. So the quality of the opposition is what drives the numbers to a huge extent.
Yeah, it is always interesting. Massive fan back in the day of all the obvious ones like Chris Ayer, Virgil van Dijk, of course. But I loved Denier. I loved who was the other one? Benkovic was a favourite of mine. With regards to that, who is the kind of top three? Because from my eye test, I'm probably going to say Virgil van Dijk, CCV would be up there, and maybe even Chris Ayer.
Ayers was defensively, he's a bit like Scales in that he jumped several inches shorter than his height, if you know what I mean. he got shorter the more he tried to jump for the ball. Scales is very similar in that regard. I would say that obviously Carter Vickers and Van Dijk. The third one I would put in, and people have very near bias memories of Chris Julian because of the way it ended. The fact that he didn't play for a year, he was out with that long injury, and it all kind of ended on a very low key note. But when Chris Julian was fit and he was playing regularly, he's definitely up there as the sort of third of that three for me, no doubt.
That's interesting.
He's dominant in both boxes. I mean, his aerial ability was tremendous. He didn't have a lot of pace either, but Neil Lennon's teams tended to play a lot deeper than what Rodgers' teams do.
Yeah, he was talking earlier in the week, and obviously talking about playing under Lennon, playing under Ange Postecoglou. Big shout out, guys, to Ange. Ange is in the semi-finals. It's tough to do. Not everybody can do it. He's in the semi-finals of the Europa League. And what I found interesting of that is he's coming up against our old foes, Bodo Glimt. Remember?
The Wi-Fi password, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And, I actually had a look at them because I'm so focused on Celtic and our own opponents that when I seen the results coming through last night, and I was delighted, obviously, because Bodo Glimt knocked out a team that I don't think we've got much time for. I was looking at it, I was like, I wonder if it's the same guy. And it is. It's Knutson that's still in charge, isn't it?
Same manager. He won't leave.
He's he won't leave. Several big teams, but by the way his contract's set up is quite interesting. He's the Jackie McNamara of Norway. He's the guy that gets the percentage of the sales. So I think his cut-out's like 10%. So for all these big players that have moved on, I think back to when we played them, I think the best player on the part that day was the boy Solbakken. He made the move to like Roma or something like that. You get 10% of that. So I can understand why he wouldn't want to move on, to be fair to him. But I think he's a very good coach. He's brought through a lot of young players in Norway. Although if you watch that penalty shootout from last night, it might be one of the worst I've seen. Some terrible penalties.
Is there? I was watching Joe Hart's penalty during the week as well. That was a shocker. I didn't realise how bad that was at the time. But yeah, Big Ange, wish him all the best. Hopefully he does well. He wins trophies in his second season, doesn't he?
I'll break an Alan stat since we're throwing stat heavy today. He's the fourth Spurs manager to take a team to a European semi-final.
Okay. You want us to try and name the four of them?
I've not even got them to hand, but he's the first, obviously, since Pochettino. But
David O'Leary. David O'Leary will be another one.
That's a really good...
Nah, he was in the Spurs. He was Leeds.
It's a really good indication. Obviously, it's not going well for him in the league, but there's a team there. It's just whether they can pull it together and get themselves out. And obviously, the Man United game last night was excellent in extra time as well.
Incredible. Absolutely incredible. Yes, obviously, they can go away and lick their wounds, but fair play to Big Ange, and I hope he does well. Donny Tiny Hands, you're in on the comments, you're in on the YouTube. Player back 3, Trusty Scales, Rocky, CCV. Alan's not having it. He's absolutely not having that at all, Donny. We've also got Jay Conley, Jay Larkin. I think Trusty is a better player. Notably, his pace is important when we play a high line. However, if the manager can't rely on Trusty's attitude, then Scales has to keep his place. And Kevin Graham's just rubbing our noses in it here. Afternoon, comrades, Pint, Sun Lounger, and Acsom. Incidentally, maybe it is sunny where he lives. So he's maybe out in the back garden, who knows? And then we've also got Charlie Conley coming in. A blessed Good Friday. Tim Alloy's happy Geekster Acsom, says Joe Hammond. We love the Geekster element of it. But before we move on to contracts and the rest of this weekend's action, Alan, you have been credited, and quite rightly so, by introducing a phrase into Scottish football vernacular, which I don't think we'll ever leave, and that is patterns of assistance. And since the last time you were on, a certain fan group of another club have adopted it almost as their own, saying that there's patterns of assistance that absolutely are against their club and benefit Celtic, which I find bizarre. But since you were last on, we have lost one of the officials in Alan Muir. You know, we've already done our minute silence about all that kind of stuff as well. No surprise, really, is it? And it's interesting, Alan, how, and I'm not saying it was a knock-on effect of that discussion. Obviously, you put a lot of work into it. It's interesting how it's changed. You know, the introduction of Willie Collum, you know, as the head of referees, Rangers getting fewer penalties, Tavernier not scoring 25 goals a season. Very interesting indeed. They don't always go your way, of course. The Easter Road incident being a prime example of that. What's your thoughts on it? Are we getting any better? I mean, obviously, this is a conversation we have lots on the Acsom group chat, isn't it?
Yeah, so there's two things, and they're related. So one is the quality of the refereeing, and the second is the hitherto lack of policies, controls, and a will to counter the totally human and natural impacts of unconscious bias, which the SFA have steadfastly refused to even acknowledge is a thing, and supported by the media, who insist that Scottish refereeing is the only job in the world where humans do not display unconscious bias. It's incredible. But coming back to the quality of the refereeing then, has it improved? I don't think it has. I think we're still seeing terrible mistakes. And in fact, the introduction of VAR serves to highlight more, to a greater degree, the lack of quality within the officiating fraternity. But that's no surprise. They're part-time, and they're operating in a full-time elite sporting environment. So you're always, you know, it's the same as a part-time footballer couldn't be expected to perform to the same level as his full-time colleagues in a team. A part-time referee can't be expected to be, you know, as either as physically fit or as mentally adept at his job as a full-time official. So that's just a fundamental, and it's probably cost-driven issue in the Scottish game. The second thing is that I'm 100% fully supportive of VAR. It takes us forward massively, but you have to accept the limitations of the process and of the systems, and you have to accept them. You have to policy around them, and therefore don't try and be definitive about things you cannot be definitive about, because the technology won't allow it. So accept that, and accept that there's always going to be this margin of error that the technology cannot solve for. But even having said all that, it does take you massively forward. And then, but where Willie Collum has really transformed things is, you know, we use words like sort of transparency and accountability, and they're easy words to say, and they kind of just drift off into the ether. But they're incredibly powerful if implemented correctly. And what we've seen this season is a couple of you know, innovations, if you like, from Column, which have shone a light on the processes and the procedures employed in refereeing, and they're very simple. And I don't think anyone would disagree with them. And it doesn't matter who you support. I imagine everyone is supportive of them. So, on a Thursday every month, he goes through with the lad from the BBC, Thomas Duncan, or never remember his name, Duncan Thomas or whatever.
Gordon Duncan.
Gordon, sorry. And they go over some contentious issues. Willie Collum explains if they've got it wrong, he says they've got it wrong, and he explains why it's wrong and what they would have done. We've even to the extent of hearing some of the audio from the game, including that incredible fanboy effort from Greg Aitken in the first game of the season, where I actually thought it was Chris Boyd when I first heard it, but it was actually a referee. It's astonishingly so. That, don't underestimate the power of that, right? That is hugely important. Similarly, having all of the independent panels' findings, review of VAR incidents published on a website available for everyone to see. Do not underestimate the power of that. Has Willie Collum changed attitudes at the SFA? No. Has he changed the cultural composition and predilections and opinions of the referees? No. But has he changed behaviour? Yes. And that's all we can ask. We can't ask people to have different opinions. We can't ask people to change their biases because we don't like them. But all we ask for is that referees behave in a professional, consistent manner as best as possible, given the constraints that they work under, both of talent and time and process. And the evidence seems to be that this behaviour is changing for the better, in that, are they still making terrible decisions? Yes, they are. But are those decisions appearing to impact all teams equally badly? Yeah, seems to be the case. And I think that's all we've ever wanted. Yes, Celtic still get bad decisions, but so do all the other teams. And it seems to be kind of fall in a fairly sort of normal distribution, which is exactly what you'd expect. Right? Some seasons, some teams might get more bad decisions than others. But over a period, and when I was looking at patterns of assistance, I was going back many years. Yes, you can get little if you want to, and this is where a lot of their fans were getting themselves tied to knots. If you want to reframe it and focus on a particular slice of time, then you can make a point if you like. But if you look over multiple seasons, and what as we come out of the Crawford Allen era into the Willie Collum era, and I've got data that bookends that 4 years under Crawford Allen. Those 4 years are looking like a pretty massive outlier. And you have to ask the question, why is that? Why did that happen? What led to that outlier being so extreme? I mean, beyond statistical significance on a whole range of key metrics around key decisions in big games. That was then. And we need to be very mindful of not falling back into that type of era. But what Willie Collum has done is, by highlighting and publicising mistakes, holding hands up and saying, yes, mistakes were made. Has he improved the quality of refereeing? That's a debate. I don't know if he has or he hasn't, but he's certainly driving behaviour whereby all the referees now know, if I make a bad decision, for whatever reason in my head, that was going on in my head when I made it, and Willie's calling me out on a Thursday on video with a lad from the BBC, I'm not going to be happy, and I don't want that. So I'm going to do my utmost not to be on Willie's show on a Thursday, and do my utmost not to be on the report that's put on the website from the independent review panel. So that is a massive step forward, and people need to kind of. I always see this start to get framed as, put VAR in the bin and VAR's rubbish, right? People need to understand the VAR is it's a bunch of technology, and it's how it's used, and it's what the limitations of that technology are, and it's human beings that operate it, and that's the key factor. And so long as the human beings operating it are not great referees, which is the case in Scotland, that's objectively a fact. They don't get big European games. They don't even get to go to the World Cup. They don't get to go to the European Championships. Objectively, Scottish referees are terrible, right? So we have to accept that fact. We have to accept that we've got a pound shot VAR. We have to accept it's got limitations. But has it taken us forward? Massively. Has Willie Collum improved behaviour, if not performance? Massively. So well done to him.
No, brilliant, Alan. And it's great to get an update on that. And I'm always a great believer, Colin, that things that can be resolved by proper budgeting have to be resolved in Scottish football. I look at Scottish football just now, just in the last 48 hours or so, Hamilton Accies, getting deducted 15 points for various indiscrepancies rather. And you've got Dumbarton and Inverness Cally Thistle both having gone into administration at different points this season. The Scottish game, isn't it, still in a state of flux? And a lot of this is down to really poor management from the toppest most highest corridors of SFA towers. And I look at things like what we do put money into and what can be saved and then put into VAR and full-time refereeing in the top division and in the cup tournaments. There's always a way, isn't there? I mean, if you're creative, if you're entrepreneurial, if you're able to attract sponsorship deals, and you're able to identify where there's a black hole in money that isn't really benefiting the game, and to then reroute that into other aspects of the game, there's always a way of improving it, in my view, Colin. And I think Scottish football is let down by those that make that decision.
I mean, £500,000 could probably be saved by getting rid of the chief executive, who seems to do absolutely nothing every year at the SPFL. So there's £500,000 you could put into something. But yeah, money it's always been the telling factor in Scottish football. It's always been the big two have money and the rest don't have money, and it's just the way that people look at it. In terms of VAR, as Alan said, we've got a pound shot VAR. It is the basic of most basic systems. It's rarely collaborated, right? I mean, just taking a look at it, nothing is clear cut. In terms of full-time referees, absolutely agree with that. I think it's pathetic in this day and age that we're trying to attract these top players to come and play in Scotland, and they're coming up against guys who, when they finish, they've actually got to go home because they maybe have a home report to do because they're a surveyor part-time or whatever it has to be. We really have to try, and if we want to have a professional football league, it should be professional from the ground up. And in Scotland, that just doesn't seem to be a thing. So there's a long, long way for Scotland to go. I agree with a lot of what Alan was saying. The introduction of the VAR review has been great. The standard of Scottish refereeing, terrible. It'll be a long time. I think it'll be maybe by the time my kids have kids, that'll be when we see a Scottish referee back at a major tournament, because the standard has got so poor. But all we can do is keep making them accountable, and the more accountable that you make them, then, as it's shown over the last few years, there's been a drive for change, there's been a demand for change, and eventually the fans will win out.
Yeah, you would hope so. Well-supported nation as it is. Big shout out to Aidan, Craig and Art. Look at that. Liam and Noel wearing the old 1990s Celtic jerseys. That just arrived. Absolutely love the design. I think they're sold out, but go and check out Aidan, Craig and Art on the socials and on his website as well. We've got Joe Hamilton coming in to say, seeing the Celtic tops and Irish flags last night was pure class. Yes, our friends who we wish them well, but personally I want Big Ange to win it. We've also got AR. This chat is too heavy for this time of day. Oh, well, we'll just talk about all the Subbuteo figures behind you then, Alan Morrison. That is some collection. I can't get over how good that is. Magnet 67. Afternoon Acsom team. I prefer Scales with CCV. I think they work better together, although they see far too much of the ball almost as the main playmakers. That's the way that Brendan works, though, isn't it? CCV and Scales says Jungle Lion. And John Mullane says, morning from a wet and windy Galway. Yup, those two boys for me. Agreeing with Jungle Lion. Let's move on then, Colin. You were having a wee look at who's maybe out of contract at the end of the season and what do we do with them. So let's bring up this beautiful little document that you did earlier on. Talk us through it, mate.
So, first of all, this obviously comes off the back of the news that broke yesterday that it looks as though there has been a breakthrough in the contract talks with Greg Taylor. And it does look as though Taylor will be looking to stay for the next 3 seasons at Celtic, which I think for Greg Taylor is actually a good move. I don't know. It's obviously going to cause a lot of divide in the Celtic fan base on whether it's a good move for the club or not. But in terms of Greg Taylor, obviously he's staying in Scotland. He's obviously just got a young family. It was really nice to see him bring his young daughter on as a mascot there on Saturday. It was a great thing to see. But it looks as though he'll be tied up for 3 years once that's confirmed. So it's quite interesting because as we look ahead into the summer window and how we restructure the team, and obviously Rodgers has mentioned in the last sort of week or so, there's some players that he's not overly happy with, doesn't think that they've got the ambition to be at Celtic Park. So you're expecting that this will be a particularly busy window in terms of activity in and out of the club. But in terms of where we are as a squad, the contract situation is actually extremely healthy, as we'll look at here. And first of all, taking a look at who's out of contract this summer. Now, first of all, big shout out to UEFA. These pictures that are coming up on the screen are fantastic. How they've managed to get the players to pose for these is brilliant. You'll see quite a few of these. But the one that jumps out right away is the man to our right here, James McCarthy. Now, the lesser seen James McCarthy, as far as I'm aware, and I don't know, Paul or Alan, you might have heard differently, James's contract is up this summer. However, I don't think he's been seen at Lennoxtown or at Celtic Park for the last year or so. There seems to be some major injury issues there, and I think he's just seeing out his contract as a sort of gardening leave thing. Paul, I don't know if you've heard anything more.
Yeah, I heard he was at Hamilton coaching the kids. That last I heard, he was working with the kids at Hamilton. So I think you're right. I think there's been an agreement there whereby, look, there's no real point in you coming in. But if you want to maybe start working on your development as a coach, maybe a gentleman's agreement in that respect, Colin, you can go and do that.
Yeah. And I'm going to put these three up and we'll go through each of the years as what we would look at doing in the summer. So first of all, I'll start with Greg Taylor. It does look as though he's going to sign a new 3-year contract. Alan, do you think that's the right move for Celtic? Obviously, I think it's the right move for Greg, but in terms of Celtic, do you think it's a smart move?
So listen, there's always multiple elements to this. There's a human element. I mean, you mentioned his lovely wee daughter that you brought onto the pitch, so cute. He's obviously starting a young family, so the very human element is, in terms of where he wants to go, how much disruptions you want in his life, in terms of his support network, where he's living, etc. But also got to balance that with, where could he go, where he could earn, maybe life-changing money when it will set up him and his family for life, that kind of thing as well. He has to take into consideration, and then to sort of dial it back to from the club's perspective and just looking at it in cold business terms. We know we've got Kieran Tierney coming in. We've got a Champions League level left back who's probably on Champions League level money, right? So, Celtic, like every other club, has to operate within FSR guidelines in terms of wage cost control. How much do you want to pay your backup left back? I think is what it may well come down to. Do you want to give a salary that you might want to allocate to a new right winger or forward, for example? Do you want to allocate that portion of your budget to your backup left back? That has to be a consideration, and you have to look at it in that sense. So, I think there's. You're speaking as if he's probably going to sign a deal. I've not heard one way or the other what his intentions are, but to me it sounds unlikely. 3 years is also an odd amount of time to offer him a deal. It's like if you really wanted him, you'd offer him a 5-year deal, take him through to he's 32 years old, right? So it kind of all feels a bit half-arsed. We don't know how much money he's been offered, and we don't know what his other options are. Would Brendan Rodgers like to have Greg Taylor as his backup left back? I suspect yes, he would, because Greg Taylor, and I'm going to steal. We talked about this on the Huddle Breakdown pod last night, and what I'm just about to say is what James said. His words, not mine. Taylor knows how Celtic play. He could play the system in his sleep. He knows where to go. He knows the patterns. All that. That's what makes him so effective in a way. So it would be safe for him and safe for Rodgers to have him around in that sense. But if he wants to, 27 years old, last big contract of his career probably, if he wants to go off and have more adventures, and 3 years to me sounds a bit like, do they really want me to stay? And as I say, I think, and maybe I think there's a lot of things going on here. So I wouldn't say it's cut and dried. I'm not sure it's the best thing for Taylor, if I'm honest with you. I think it would probably be a good thing for Celtic, but on the caveat that if you're going to pay, I don't know, I'm just guessing here, somewhere between 20-25 grand a week to your backup left back, that's a lot of money for a backup left back. And I'm wondering if that could be best allocated somewhere else.
I think, Paul, when you look at it, the choice is really the two that are staring you in the face right now. I don't think Rodgers or Celtic will go beyond that. Obviously, there's young Matthew Anderson who's been out on loan. We've seen Mitchell Frame come through as well. But there doesn't seem anybody ready to jump into that sort of backup position. And one of the things with Kieran Tierney coming back to the club is, with this season as an exception, there has been multiple times over his career where he's missed 10, 15, 20 games through injury. There's something that Celtic are going to have to monitor as he comes back to make sure that we can get him available for the biggest games coming up next year. is it a case of better the devil you know with Greg Taylor offering him that deal, knowing that in games like Kilmarnock at home he can come on and have a man of the match performance? Or, as Alan says, is it worth seeing as a better value in the market?
You know this, Colin, I think referencing the huddle breakdown comments as well, I just think that if a player is already in a squad and they have the mentality of a winner, because we don't know that about anybody coming in. And I think that was one of the biggest issues when we brought in 9 players for Brendan Rodgers' first transfer window. You don't know the mentality of these guys. You know, the culture of the dressing room and the club that they've come from. We know what Greg's all about. He knows what Celtic's all about. So if it's a deal that will probably be his last big deal and taking him up to the kind of higher earners at the football club, I think he's earned it. I think he's earned it over the years. And it's an interesting scenario, actually, coming in when Kieran Tierney's coming in, because albeit you're the backup per se, you're still going to play a lot of football, aren't you?
Yeah.
Because you're going to protect Kieran Tierney. I know that his agent is adamant that although Tierney's had injury problems, he's not like as injury prone as some would like to make out. I remember looking fairly recently at the senior careers of Tierney and Taylor, and Tierney had played more football at the same age, right in the here and now, which is interesting because they both made their senior debuts at 17. So you forget just how much football Kieran Tierney played as a youngster, which obviously caught up with him eventually. But he's still going to play a lot of football. Yeah. And unless they have got somebody on their radar, Colin, and, you know, it could be someone from an academy. We looked at Alex Bailly. There might be other players similar to that you can bring into the football club and they're going to improve your squad. Then I absolutely would go with Greg Taylor. I absolutely would go with him. Bring him in.
Maybe it's just a deal we see if Andy Robertson stays up to his task of saying that he always wanted to finish his career at Celtic. So,
well, if he comes up, we need to bring him again as well. I was just looking at Matthew Anderson. I love the fact that a kid like Anderson's gone out there and played senior football. 38 games for Admira Wacker. I want to see more of that. I want to see more youngsters getting out and getting the first team experience, Colin, because he might not make it at Celtic, but he's much better placed now than he would be if he's, you know, kicking about in a B team.
Yeah, definitely. Especially with the reform that it looks as though is going to happen for the Lowland League as well. We really do need to get these guys out playing adult football, especially with the lack of reserve football that's out there. So just in going through it, a short response from both of you. Of the 3 that are here, who would you keep on for next season? Alan, I'll come to you first.
Yeah, so I did a piece on Schlupp and Taylor. It's a very similar conversation to Trusty and Scales. If your priority is pace, power, defensive strength, recovery pace, all that, and actually a better crosser of the ball, then Schlupp's probably your man. If you want an inverted fullback, good at breaking lines, good at receiving balls in interesting spaces, not quite as defensively sound, doesn't have the pace, Taylor's your man. That's your choice. I agree with everything Paul said there, actually, you know, about him being a known entity, and he does fit the system brilliantly, and he's still got the same constraints as he's always had, and that's never going to change. So, but I guess I'm more inclined to live with that as a backup than I am with him as a starter, if that makes sense. Schlupp, yeah, I think he's at 32. He's obviously not going to get any better. He's probably going to be quite expensive, so I'm kind of cooling on that one, I'll be honest.
Paul?
I was a big fan of Schlupp when he first came in, Colin. But a wee bit like Alan, I've gone off the idea because it would be expensive to bring up a football club on a permanent deal. And I think in the last few games, you know, getting hooked at half time is a massive statement by the gaffer. And as a footballer, I think, you know, you receive that message loud and clear, don't you, if you're taken off at half time. It's happened to Schlupp. Taylor's come back in. The timing seems to be really, really good. I've been a big critic of Greg Taylor under Brendan Rodgers. I don't think I criticised him as much under Ange Postecoglou, where he probably hit his Celtic peak during those 2 seasons. But I do think that, you know, I know he didn't come through our ranks, Colin, but you need a nucleus, a hardcore of players that know this club inside out, and Taylor knows the club inside out. Give him the deal. keep him here. So of the three, and by the way, I wish James McCarthy all the best. I know that sometimes he's the butt of many jokes on Acsom and all the rest of it. That guy's had a horrendous injury record. What a footballer. I mean, imagine having him, earlier in his career, Colin.
Yeah, absolutely. And chat, you can let us know who you would keep out of these three. I think Taylor will be the one that stays, but don't ever rule out James McCarthy becoming the B team manager. Just never rule it out. It's jobs for boys in that situation. Looking ahead, obviously this summer we'll be looking to try and tie down some other players that are coming out of contract in the forthcoming years. The mainstay here, I think, guys, is James Forrest, Paul. I mean, he's becoming a modern day legend at the club. We obviously are looking for him to try and get that goal this season to keep his record going. Another player that's been fraught with injuries throughout his career. How do you see this one going? Do you think we'll offer him a new deal, or do you think that'll be maybe his final hurrah next season?
Again, when you look at his career, I just think that you don't only benefit from his contribution on the park. A player like James Forrest, I think, is vital to a club like Celtic for new arrivals, people coming through the academy. He is a role model. And as well as all the personal accolades, becoming the most decorated footballer in Celtic history, scoring that in that 16th consecutive season, etc., he can still contribute, Colin. He's had injuries over the last few seasons. He's had injuries throughout his career, hasn't he? But again, you keep him. You keep him. What age is he going to be when that expires? What age is he now?
Maybe 33. I don't know.
So he's 33 now. He's 33 just now. He'll be 34. He'll be 34 in July, actually. So he'll be touching 35 by the time his contract's up. I think it comes down to the player as well, Colin. What's his aspirations? Does he want to move into coaching? Because at 35, maybe the time is up for him as a footballer.
Yeah, and you don't get many players nowadays that are that real one-man club. And it would be great to see James Forrest sort of hang the boots up as a sort of modern-day Celtic legend, Alan. And I'm sure the stats have probably waned over the years, but what I think back to is my first Celtic teams that I remember watching sort of under Martin O'Neill and guys like that, where you had players like Paul Lambert, like Tom Boyd, who were coming towards the end of their career, but they were still considered squad players, and they were still players that, if it was an early round in the cup or if the league was wrapped up, these guys could come in and they could do a job, and I do think that James Forrest can do that as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, James has become, as with age, he's become a really smart player, a really intelligent player. I mean, when he was a young kid, obviously he could kind of blast past people with pace, and I think there's a few lessons for Nicholas Kuhn in watching James Forrest and how he's managed his career and how he's kind of improved the. I mean, he was always pretty safe on the ball, James. He always was. Perhaps you could argue even erred on the side of being a little bit conservative on the ball sometimes. Like he wouldn't take a chance with a cross or a shot unless he was sure it was on. But that is indicative of good game IQ, as I would call it, good game intelligence, good decision making is what it comes down to. And I think that's improved with him on age. His cameo, 60 minutes against Kilmarnock on the weekend there, I thought was fascinating. And it was fascinating not so much because Forrest himself was, creating a lot of danger with direct chances or having a lot of shots. What he was doing was he was knitting the play together, and you saw a functioning right-hand side of Engels, Johnson, and Forrest in concert, with intelligent movement, intelligent passing, and Forrest was the fulcrum of that, and I think he helped other players look better. We've not seen a lot of that from Engels, for example. We know that Johnson's a smart player. We know that he combines very well with Kuhn as well. But to see the three of them there really working that right-hand side intelligently, that I really enjoyed that aspect. Now, the question then becomes, well, how long can he continue to operate at that level? As you say, coming towards 35 or what have you. And how long can he continue to operate that level in an individual game? I was clearly getting knackered by the 60th minute. Now, I know he's been out injured for a long time. He's not played a lot of football, so that will be a factor. For me, providing his age regression doesn't suddenly fall off a cliff, and that is a risk since you start hitting 34, 35. To have someone like him as a relatively low-cost option as a squad player, someone that you can bring on manage the game, trust to do smart things, and like you say, and I completely agree with the concept of having a backbone of players who aren't necessarily superstars, but they're just players who they're always there. They're always there for you. They're amongst all the change and turmoil of a football club, they're your constants, and they're reliable and they're consistent. He still fits into that category for me, but he's not going to be a starter, I don't think. And we just need to think about, I'd be looking closely at the sports science data to sort of see where is he on his decline curve physically in terms of that next contract. But if he plays like he did at the weekend and he can continue to contribute to the squad on a more or less as a sub basis at that level, then I'm thinking we should keep him around for sure.
Mm. It's an interesting one. I think James Forrest's career, as a lot of people are saying in the comments, if you were given that sort of career as any sort of Celtic player, you'd be absolutely delighted with it. So it'll be interesting to see what the next 12 months lies ahead for James, especially if he's managing to stay fit. One that we'll maybe just about skip over here is Johnny Kenny. I think everybody's aware that he probably doesn't have a future at Celtic anymore, unfortunately. I think he'll probably go back to the League of Ireland in the summer. But the one that jumps out at me here, Paul, is the fact that we've got two goalkeepers on this list, and it's our first and third choice goalkeeper. They've gone into the summer only having 12 months left on both of their contracts. For me, suggests that we're probably in the market to find a replacement soon.
It is interesting, isn't it? And I mean, obviously, that's a cracking image of Scott Bain there. That's like the Freddy Krueger Scott Bain image there. He is in the carpool with James McCarthy. He sat on the bench as an unused sub about 300 times for Celtic. He's got the best contract on the planet, hasn't he, Scott Bain? I think it's time for Bain certainly to move on, Colin. And you're right, you need to bring somebody in. But if we're going to stick to the plan, Sinisalo's going to be your first choice, isn't he? Sinisalo's going to be your first choice.
Yeah.
Schmeichel will probably see out his contract. Would it surprise me if he got an extra year after that? It all depends. We talk about player regression and all that. What kind of season is he going to have next season? I think he wants to play, wants to break all his dad's records, doesn't he, for Denmark and all that kind of stuff. But Sinisalo needs to be your first choice moving on, Colin. So you're then looking to bring somebody in as a backup. And sometimes your backup goalie is rarely seen. You think he's Zaluska, Mark Brown, Scott Bain. It could be that type of goalie that you bring in, a safe pair of hands if you need them.
If you look at it though, Paul, I don't know where we stand in that situation though, because Sinisalo's had limited minutes, and I'm sure, Alan, there's probably not enough minutes to get an accurate overview in terms of stats for Sinisalo. However, as you say, he's been looked at as the future number one at the club. He's still very young. But I do feel as though with the signings of Joe Hart and the signing of Kasper Schmeichel, Paul, that this idea of going to the trusted hands, if need be, has been a very successful route for Celtic over the last couple of seasons. You just wonder who that next one would be coming in, and whether that's a case of we look at it now or if we look at it next summer. I think there is big change coming in that goalkeeping department, because there isn't really the players from the youth squad that are coming through that you're saying they're the ones that's going to come in and be that third choice goalkeeper. Obviously, we had Toby Oluwayemi, who I think's out on loan. Is it at Dunfermline just now?
Yeah, he's working with Lenny and Wanyama.
Yeah, and Josh Clark, who's out at Ayr, I believe, as well. But I can't see any of those coming through, and it's just a case of maybe we'll see some movement this summer in terms of the goalkeepers. What do you think?
Wouldn't surprise me if we had another Hart strokes Michael type move, Colin. Wouldn't surprise me. But again, it's going against that plan, that supposed plan of Sinisalo learning from an experienced goalie so that he can become the first choice. It's difficult, like Alan would say, it's difficult without the data on Sinisalo to suggest whether or not he's going to be the first choice. But yeah, nothing would surprise me either way. I'm going to be honest with you. We might still have Kasper Schmeichel in a couple of seasons.
Yeah, the way he's been playing, you wouldn't rule it out. It'll be interesting, I think, to see how he is once he comes back from that injury. It did look a bit of a sore one. I know we're running over here, guys. If you can hang around with us, we're into Acsom extra time here on a Friday. But we've got some interesting views over this one. I mean, we're now 2 seasons ahead. We're in 2027. And of the players that are out of contract, the only 2 players to me that jump out as first-team regulars just now are Kasper Schmeichel and Daisen Maeda. And the talk is that Daisen Maeda is looking to be offered a new contract this summer, Alan. But this shows some really good, strong squad management from Celtic, that they've tied down their big assets. And even over the next 2 years, that period where when you're halfway through a contract, it used to be the time, as Peter Lawwell put it, once after 2 years, you either sign a new one or you move on. The only player that's really in that position going into this summer is Daisen Maeda.
Yeah, so I think, as fans, instinctively, we want, players to stay forever, score 1,000 goals and be heroes, to us, and the poster on the wall never gets old type of thing. I mean, that's a natural supporter sort of mentality. And of course, being on brand, you know what I'm going to say next, which is that the business model, is to, be a selling club and sell as what Brendan Rodgers called, peak asset value. And I would have thought that Dyson Maeda, who costs 1.5 billion, is currently at peak asset value. Is his stock going to get higher? I mean, is there a centre forward in world football that presses as aggressively and persistently as he does? Oh, and by the way, he's a pretty good goal scorer as well. That is a pretty powerful combination in modern football. I would have thought the interest in him would be significant. And much as this will be unpopular, is it not the case that Celtic should be selling him? Celtic should be selling Rio Hatate, should be selling Nicholas Kuhn, should be selling Maeda for significant amounts of money because of them being at that peak asset value. Now, again, with my supporter head on, you want to build a backbone of players that you hope will stay there forever. I always thought that, for example, Carter Vickers and Kyogo were two players that they'd found their home. They'd found a place where you could almost count on them. They could move abroad. They're of a high standard, and they can probably play they'll stay at Celtic for through the guts of their career. That's a very romantic view. The reality, as I say, is sadly more prosaic and business driven. So I don't know. I mean, Maeda, I think he did give an interview. Obviously, he doesn't speak great English. I mean, he speaks very good English for compared to my Japanese, obviously. But where he did make some odd comments about, I don't know what's going to happen in the summer, which I suppose is what all footballers say. But it would kind of make sense for Celtic as a football club over the long term to be getting maximum dollar for these players at this time, especially him. The caveat being, can we then trust them to spend the money wisely? That's a different topic, I know.
I think, Paul, when you look at it this summer, we're in the position where we have one recognised centre forward at the club in Adam Idah. Obviously, Daisen Maeda's played very well in that position, but he's always been seen as a winger. He's never really been seen as the guy to go through the middle. Now, his goals this season will probably argue that otherwise, but in terms of his natural position, he's been played as a winger. So I'm sure Brendan Rodgers would want to hold on to him this summer as what he looked at previously as the third choice, maybe even the second choice striker, and perhaps go in and look for that goal scorer, whether that be targets we've previously looked at like Quistgarden or someone else. But for me, I think what Alan was saying is right. There is a point of selling players at their peak value to get the money in, because that's the way that Celtic have been doing it, and that's the business plan. However, I think the sale of Kyogo in January there for just over £10 million suggests that even if we hold on to Maeda for another season or two, it's not to say that we won't get the big money for him.
This is the thing, because as a supporter, like Alan says, I don't like seeing quality leaving Celtic. I didn't like it when Jota left. I didn't like it when Lila Bada left, Matt O'Reilly, and I've never enjoyed that. But you understand that when we're selling the dream to these guys, lock, stock and barrel, you're moving over from Japan. We will put you on a platform. There will come a time where you might be able to move on for bigger riches and all this kind of stuff. And in the meantime, we maintain our dominance and we try and progress in Europe, and everybody's happy. Maeda's probably the only player for me in this squad right now who's at that point in his game where he's ready for the step up. I don't think Kuhn's ready for it, and I don't think Hatate is. I think they have shown potential to be at this level, but there's no way they're at the peak of their powers. I think Maeda is. I'd hate to lose him. I'd absolutely hate to lose him. Give him the biggest bumper deal that we can possibly give him. Extend the contract, Colin, and then we'll take it from there. But absolutely, when you look at his performance this season, there's going to be interest, and there'll be interest this summer.
Yeah, definitely. Now, looking at the other two players that are there, Luke McCowan being one, someone who's been a very good squad player, I think, for Celtic this season. It's probably the kind of signing that Rodgers likes to bring in, relatively cheap, and they can go into the league games and obviously have an impact. And the Bricky himself, Anthony Ralston, who I think is supposed to be pointing to the Champions League badge there. I'm not sure if he's meant to be pointing to the charity badge, but Ralston obviously given that brand new bumper contract after his performances under Ange Postecoglou. Contract's up not next summer, but the following summer, Alan. He's again one of those players, and I think when you look at it, we do have to have a core of Scottish players, especially for European competitions. Is he the best right back in the world? No. Is he the best right back in Scotland? No.
Yes.
Is he an able backup that can go in and see out a game? Yes. Will he get a move to a team where he's going to be the guy? I don't think so. I'm sure you'll have the stats to tell us yes or no, but for me, I think Ralston's one of these guys that if you cut him open, he bled Celtic and he'll probably hang around.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Again, I agree with you. You need to have squad players, literally players that are happy to rack up maybe 1,500, even 2,000 minutes a season, but not necessarily be starting that many games. And both McCowan and Ralston, and they're both same age. I mean, Ralston's going to be 27 at the end of next season. McCowan's going to be 28. So they've both got big decisions to make about their own personal futures, because again, they're in that Greg Taylor territory of the next contract's probably going to be your last really big one. So what do you want to do? Do you want to stay at Celtic? Because unlike the Greg Taylor, Jeffrey Schlupp conversation, there is quite a drop off between Alistair Johnston and Tony Ralston. So long as Alistair Johnston's around, Ralston is going to very solidly be the backup, and therefore get minutes accordingly. So as he passes his 27th birthday, what does he want to do? Does he want to go to another club where he'll be first choice and perhaps be Scotland's number one right back? Right? These things are important to professionals. It's not just the money. Or is he happy, like you say, to be at Celtic and have this kind of backup role? I don't know. I think he's the sort of player that he probably wouldn't be coasting. He's a fully committed player. He always gives you the same effort and commitment in that regard. So for me, he falls into that useful sort of cheap backup, which is kind of damning with faint praise. I hope for his own sake that he has a critical look at it in 27 and in a year or so and thinks, where should I be for my career, for my family? And same with McCowan. I don't think McCowan's going to be a Celtic starter, but he's a terrific player to have in the squad, and he's someone that you're happy to have come on in games, and you think can change a game even. So, but he'll have the same decision to make, both on a human level, in terms of what does he want his career to look like, where is he going to get his last big payday, etc., versus does he feel he's living the dream being a backup at Celtic? So it's an interesting one. Don't know the right answer. I'd be happy to have them on that basis, but I completely support them if they feel that they want to, get that last big payday and perhaps be a starter somewhere else.
Yeah, that's the thing, Paul. We're looking at this now. So we're up to 2027. We're obviously 2 years ahead of where we are just now in real time. As we pointed out, Kasper Schmeichel, Dyson Maeda, they are the two that are the pivotal positions for Celtic just now. But in terms of squad management, I think this is the strongest we've been in a long time in terms of having the power of the contract, so that if a team does come knocking for the players that we'll bring up in a second who are out in further years, we should be in the position to get to top value for them. And the players, as we just mentioned there, your Luke McCowans, your Anthony Ralstons, they're either committed to the club or we're saying we think we could get a replacement in for them.
The thing as well to consider with these three, and obviously I think there'll be developments with Dyson between now and 2027, is whether or not Brendan Rodgers is around at that stage. Because he brings McCowan to the football club. I think next season we'll all stop talking about McCowan living the dream. We just need to talk about him as being a squad player trying to fight for a jersey. And then Tony Ralston, this season in terms of appearances, it's the second most he's ever made. So obviously Rodgers has a bit of belief in Tony Ralston, as did Ange Postecoglou. His first 6 seasons were, single digits in terms of appearances, Colin. But, he's a type of guy, come 2027, in 2 years' time, where it might be a lifestyle choice to go away to another country at that stage of his career. I'd like him to stay for the same reasons that I want Taylor to stay right now. Even if he's a backup, he knows the culture, he knows the identity of the football club. And I think at all big clubs, that's important. I've always thought it was important. You need to have an identity. And Tony Ralston, whilst we're not bringing through young guys every other season, because we're not doing it at the moment, Colin, I think the ones that are there, that have come through the system, you keep them. You keep them at the football club. But listen, 2 years is a long time. Loads can change. You might have a shocker of a season next year and it changes our mind based on the data available. But at this moment in time, big season for McCowan next season for me. He needs to basically get... we look beyond the fact that he's living the dream and he's a supporter in a jersey, and we just look at his performances next season.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you know what? It actually ties in well with the players that are coming up in 2028. We've obviously spoke about a couple of these in today's show. Nawrocki there, 2028. That's a long time still left in his contract if he's not part of the squad.
That's astonishing, isn't it?
Season. 2028. Liam Scales again, 2028, just got that new contract. Was it last year he got that new deal?
Mm-hmm.
Yang, obviously someone who's played some bit part minutes. Hatate, someone that Alan's just said, maybe it's time to look at cashing in on that. But with 3 years left on his deal, you'd think you'd get top value. But the one I really want to discuss here is the captain, Callum McGregor. Obviously his contract's coming up 2028. He's come under quite a bit of criticism over the last 3 or 4 months about the sort of level of his play, Paul. And there is games where you see peak Callum McGregor, and there is games where you can tell that he's been a bit leggy. He's came off a few times this season, which McGregor normally hasn't done. But the amount of minutes, and Alan, I spoke about this a couple of weeks ago, the amount of minutes that McGregor puts in season after season after season, he is someone who is probably maybe 12 to 18 months away from requiring a replacement in that position, because his body will break down on him eventually, the way that we saw Scott Brown come towards the end of his career. And although he's still got 3 years left on his deal, I think this summer's the best time to start looking around for his replacement.
Is that one for me, Colin?
I'll open it up to both of you.
Alan, I'll let you run with that first of all, because I know you've got very strong views on the type of player he is and how that can be affected by age.
So it is an interesting one. It's probably a show to itself, actually. So the Huddle breakdown actually started, really, I'm not going to go into a big boring history lesson, but it mainly started because of the decline in Scott Brown's play and just how contentious that was, and how huge numbers of the Celtic supporters didn't want to hear that message, but it was clear in the data. And I don't want to be having this conversation about Callum McGregor, right? Is what I'm saying. I just don't want to go through that again, right? The thing with McGregor is the decline in his performance numbers is absolutely clear. It's quite a gentle decline, but it is a consistent decline. It's a decline across any range of metrics you want to consider. However, so long as he's playing the role that he's playing, and so long as he's performing at the level he's playing, even a declining McGregor is worth a huge amount to the Celtic team. And I really, the way that I would kind of bring that to life a bit is to sort of say, what would it cost Celtic in the market to buy Callum McGregor as he is today, in terms of a player of that quality who plays the way he plays? If you were to go out into the market and say, that's what I want to buy, but I want a 25-year-old, how much would that cost you, right? It'd be a tremendous amount of money, which is why I was supportive of him having this long contract, because although he is declining, he's still hugely valuable to the way Celtic play and probably irreplaceable at Celtic's price point. So that makes sense. Yeah.
Yep.
So, but there's the but being, when does that regression, natural age regression start to accelerate, and when does that tipping point come where the trade-off between the way he's performing essentially isn't worth it anymore? That's a really tricky thing. None of us probably can predict that. We don't know when he's going to get injured. Some players decline very gradually. We talked about the goalkeepers before. Two classic examples. Joe Hart was an incredibly smart guy. He quit before we saw a major drop off, and that was very smart of him to do. So he did retire kind of at the top of his game in a sense. Whereas on the other side of the city, we saw Alan McGregor stay one season too long, and his form absolutely crashed, like off a cliff. He just had that one season. Schmeichel, just going back to the goalkeepers, I would be very, very worried about Schmeichel because his personality would be, I'm going to play and I'm the best, and you're going to have to drag that shirt off me, sort of thing. So he's good. I don't think he would make the same decision. I might be wrong. I'm just trying to base on his personality. So McGregor, the same. I don't think McGregor would willingly ever give up that shirt, and therefore it's something that we're going to have to get our heads around managing. And the best way to be managing is proactively. But at the moment we don't have a natural replacement. We can't replace them like for like. I can't think of many players in the world that we could afford that play like Callum McGregor, that sort of tempo setting, knitting together role that he does, where you accept the sort of relative lack of defensive strength for all these other things that he does, which essentially glue the team together and set the pace of the play. These are easy things to say, but very difficult things to actually assimilate and to have off pat like McGregor does. Like I was saying about Taylor, McGregor could play for Celtic in his sleep. He could literally, he just knows all the patterns. He knows he knows when to slow it down, when to speed it up. That's incredibly difficult to buy, but we're going to have to grasp that now and think about how we long term plan. And it might be like we went from Brown to McGregor. You don't necessarily have to replace like for like. You can actually go in a slightly different direction and have a different kind of player. Yeah. But then you have to kind of make trade-offs in other areas to still make the team coherent with that different style of player. And that takes time to do. So yep, it's on the near horizon, I would say, we're going to have to address this problem.
Yeah, and obviously, Paul, it's 3 years in advance we're looking at here. It's 2028, but that is your 3 starting midfielders right now. That's McGregor, Engels, and Hatate in there. So it might not be something for this summer, but it does say that it is something to look at definitely going forward, especially if we do look at the model that we've had and Engels come in for 11 million. We could move him on. There was talk of a bid of 15, 20 million in January there. Hatate's always had that. That's probably something, again, we could look at this summer and say, well, we don't want to be in this position in 3 years' time where we could potentially lose these 3 key players.
Yeah, there's a lot of things moving in this respect. What I would say, I'm going to make a prediction right now. And as long as I'm still kicking around, and I hope I am in 3 years, Acsom will be kicking around. But the only one of those players who will be playing the Celtics, Callum McGregor. The rest of them will be gone.
Agreed.
In 3 years' time.
If Engel's still here in 3 years, then we've all failed. He's failed.
It's went wrong.
Failed.
Yeah.
He's gone terribly wrong.
And I think, there might be a situation, Colin, where we realise in 3 years' time we still don't have what you think is a replacement for Callum McGregor. There's been talk about guys like Lennon Miller, for example, different type of player in some respects. I would love to see us planning right now to bring through the next Callum McGregor as well. Mm-hmm. Maybe I'm a romanticist in that respect, whereby you're not asking that young kid to step into McGregor's boots in 2028, but he's at a stage of his career, maybe at the age of 20, 21, where you think he may well be the next Callum McGregor in another 3 or 4 years. So you want the thing to evolve in terms of the recruitment, but also the youth development. We need to keep that conveyor belt of young talent coming through as well.
That's where that project starts, would have to be this summer, because to get to anywhere near that level and to be someone who can compete for 35 to 50 games a season for Celtic, you need to start that now. You need to integrate them in the squad for next season. They would need to get minutes next season. They'd maybe need to go on loan the following season. And then that third season, the season where McGregor's contract looks as if it could be running out, that would be the time for them to step in, because they're not going to do it overnight.
No, you're right. And again, McGregor probably at that stage is working on year-to-year deals with Celtic to see out the rest of his contract and, tick all those boxes that we've spoken about, being at the backbone of the side, the heartbeat of the dressing room and all that, even though he's not playing a lot of games. But he's moving into the territory this season of playing 50-plus games, which would be just the 5th time in his career that he's actually played over 50. In fact, it would be the 4th time. No, the 5th time. I was right first time. 5th time in his career that he's played over 50 games for Celtic. So astonishing amount of games to be playing.
Incredible, especially when you put into consideration that he was playing at times 10 and 12 games for Scotland as well, and everything else, the friendlies and everything else that comes into consideration. It's huge. But I agree with you. I do think the one player that will probably be here in the 3 years' time will be Callum McGregor. However, how happy does Liam Scales look in that photo, by the way?
Just signed his new deal, didn't he? Aye, and then he went right into the photo shoot. No, brilliant. And I don't know what Nawrowski's up to there either, but interesting that he's still kicking about if he wanted to in 2028. Bizarre. Yep. Colin, thanks for all the graphics, mate. That was brilliant. Is there another slide?
There's just one more just to wrap it up. Obviously, a lot of these players only just signed contracts, I think, this summer. You've got Johnson, Trusty, Carter Vickers, Kuhn, Bernardo, Ida, Sinisalo. And there's one beyond that expires in 2030, which is Jota. But it does show you, again, a lot of these players were players that were signed with the idea, as Alan said, of having this business where we bring them in for a relatively low fee and we move them on for a lot high value. The one that really is enlightening to me that I think has the potential to still be here in 2029, though, is Cameron Carter-Vickers, Paul.
Oh, I mean, that's interesting. Do you think that's down to his conditioning and the fact that there isn't a big move for him?
Yeah. I don't think teams would take the risk on a player that does have a bit of an injury history, not massively in the same way that the way Julian was out for a year, but I just think there's maybe teams that wouldn't take the risk on him to move up to the level where he'd go. That's a step up for him.
Potentially, yeah. I'd love to say Sinisalo will still be here because then the project's worked in respect to him coming in. Paulo Bernardo, massive season next year. I thought this season would have been a big one for him, but it's been stop and start. But the rest of them, I think you're probably right. You know, we're just in that, in modern football, we bring them in, we build them up, we sell them at the maximum price. And I'm looking at maybe AJ and Kuhn being in that category. Yep. Carter Vickers, I'd be surprised. But, you know, it might come down to the conditioning. I don't know what Alan's thoughts are on that one. But Bernardo's the player I want to see more of. Maybe not this season, but certainly next season.
Yeah, I mean, Bernardo, again, Portugal, dozens of appearances for Portugal under 21. I think he's even their captain, right? That's the profile of a player that you expect to have 2 or 3 good seasons and then move on for big money. You know, again, Johnson's approaching 26, 27, 28 range. I think Carter Vickers will be in his 30s by the time the 2029 comes along. Interesting one. Trusty we bought at 26. I think Kuhn's now getting 25 now. So these are all players that, you know, you'd think they are really, we should be looking to cash in on most of them, really. I can't imagine many of them, if any of them, will be here in 2029, if I'm honest. And Carter Vickers, as I said before, I personally hoped he might be one, you know, if you can keep 1 or 2 that are of a high quality as your backbone, he would have been one of them. But I'm a bit nervous about the injuries that he's racked up, and I haven't looked at it. I haven't looked at, you know, is he declining or what have you. But if he wanted to leave and the club got a phenomenal amount of money for him, he'd be very difficult to replace, to be honest with you. But there may come a point when that is actually the smart thing to do. Although I'd be very sorry to see him go.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you for everyone watching for the Friday show and tell on Good Friday. We have run well over, Paul, but I think it just shows you the position that we're in ahead of this summer, because let's be honest, the league's wrapped up. Hopefully on Sunday we'll progress into the Scottish Cup final, but the thoughts are already turning to next season and what we need to do to, 1, get through the European qualifiers, and 2, hopefully defend our treble.
You can't always just look at the end of your nose, Colin. You've got to look ahead, haven't you, at a club like Celtic? So it's interesting. It blows my mind that by 2030 we'll be looking at 9 in a row. 2030, 31. That's the season, isn't it? Hey, always looking at 9 in a row. Thanks everybody for getting involved. Thank you to Colin for preparing that. Always interesting. And also to Alan, who has appeared on Acsom on a regular basis for a number of years now. And it's always a fascinating insight, guys. So thank you for joining us. And thanks to everybody amongst the 1,400 strong, 1,300 of whom are still actually tuning in right now, for joining us on A Celtic State of Mind.